the day I was sworn in. You know, when I met with Dee and he said, Matt, government's all over me. I'm just a guy trying to sell ice. And if I want to sell ice, one day, I've been selling ice for 30 years? 30 years. He's been selling ice. And one day, out of the blue, a Department of Agriculture representative shows up at Dee's door and says, well, if you want to keep selling ice, you've got to add 2 new sinks. You've got to get a different kind of mop head. Now, you've got to go and get your ice tested every 90 days. You've got to go and take the restaurant manager's exam. He doesn't even sell any food. But you got to take the restaurant manager's exam. Now, of course, you can't take the restaurant manager's exam until you take the state-approved course. That'll cost you $250 to take the course. Then you drive to Tallahassee and take the exam. Now, after all that's done, now these bags you've been using, they're no good anymore. You got to have new bags with a new logo on. All these things. There's more probably. I've left off the list. But they told that to Dee, and the man's been selling ice for 30 years. And I never forget about that. You know, one of the first discussions I had when I decided to run for state representative, because this is what we're up against. Did you know in the state of Florida, we have regulations for hair braiders? Hair braiders. And I talked to one of the legislators. I talked to one of the legislators that was a proponent of this, and I said, why in the world are we regulating hair braiding? And she said, well, Matt, she was very serious. She said, if we don't regulate this, anybody with nimble fingers and a comb can braid hair. And I said, what's wrong with that? So we passed that bill with the $1 billion threshold last session. Here's what we did this session. We had to look back at some of the dead wood in these 30,000 rules on the book. So I authored, and the governor signed, we passed and the governor signed legislation that says we are going to review every darn one of them. And we're going to do it in the next 2 years. We're going to review every one of them. And if they don't make sense, we're going to set them for rapid repeal and get them off the books. Already. We got out of the legislative session, you know, in May. Yeah, May. It's my birthday. Already, there are 1,300 rules since May that nobody can explain. Nobody knows what value they have. Some have even been enforced. You know, we had someone from the Department of Education show up, and they had been collecting data from charter schools for 3 years. And though they've been collecting it, and though it had cost you over $200,000 to collect it per year, no one had ever looked at it. And no one knew why we were collecting it. And so that was just one example of a regulation that was easy to eliminate, and it saves $200 grand a year. And so 1,300 already. The next step, when I come back and speak to you the next time, we are going to have an open circuit rulemaking review website. I wanted to call it 1000badideas.org because I wanted to find 1,000 of them, but we've already found 1,300, so we got to come up with a new name. But we're going to have a website where every administrative agency has to post their rules that they're reviewing in one spot, in one space, where citizens, business people can look and say, I object. That makes no sense. There's a lower cost regulatory alternative. This doesn't serve a valuable public safety objective. We're going to get rid of it. And then we get that feedback and we'll ultimately decide whether the rules stay on the books. So I know it seems like a boring, dry subject, but to me, limited government is not something that political candidates should just put on their mouthpieces. It's not just something that you put on your bumper sticker or on your sign. You have to really believe in restraint and limited government and getting rid of some of this waste that we have in government to stop the growth that I think is the red tape that is choking some of the economic prosperity that we should be able to realize. So there's more to come on rulemaking reform, but we're taking a step in the right direction. Next issue, immigration reform. Immigration reform. My biggest regret of the session is that we didn't pass immigration reform. And we came here and we whiteboarded out, do you remember? We whiteboarded out all those different elements that we supported. And this group sent me to Tallahassee with a very clear message. And that was, if we don't hold the employers of illegal aliens accountable, then don't even call it immigration reform. Because it's not enough just to punish people who come here illegally. We have to go after the economic incentive for people to come here. And if someone is knowingly hiring illegals and bringing them here, they have some responsibility. And they have to be held accountable in some way. And so we went to Tallahassee. I was one of the sponsors, and I voted for a strong E-Verify provision that said that each business was going to have to, it's very easy. The Department of Homeland Security has a website. You go, you plug in the Social Security number, and you get back whether or not the person's here legally. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. You're going to get some false positives. Some folks are going to steal other people's Social Security numbers. But to me, at some point, we have to draw a line in the sand and say that we're going to hold employers accountable. And that was a good first step. We had the votes to pass that in the House. But unfortunately, E-Verify failed in the Florida Senate. Failed in a floor vote, didn't pass. And so we had two options. And I remember with our Judiciary Committee sitting around, and the two options were this. Well, we can pass the watered down Senate version, and we can go home and say that we've given you immigration reform, or we can go home, admit failure, and tell you the truth. And that's that we didn't have the votes to get it done. And I was a strong advocate that please don't make me go put lipstick on a pig and go home to my community and say that we did something when really we did nothing. And so I opted for candor. Now let me tell you why, because I think it's important that we know why this occurred. We went through all these arguments, pro, con, back and forth, and here's what we didn't expect. You know, we expected that all the Democrats would be against us, and they were. We expected that all of the South Florida, Miami-Dade Republicans would be against us, and they were. Here's what we never took into consideration. Otherwise, very conservative Republicans, people that believe what we believe about taxes and spending, regulation, if they were from a primarily agricultural district, they bailed. They bailed. So we had folks from citrus growing areas, sugar growing areas, tomato growing areas, that would not hang with us, and they left en masse. And when we lost the agricultural voting bloc, the game was over. And we did not have the votes in the Senate to get E-Verify passed. Now, here's what I'm glad we did do. We put them on the boards. It is a public record which senators would not support E-Verify. And so I encourage our group to communicate with the grassroots organizations in their districts and let them know that those folks would not hang with us, and they were more beholden to agribusiness than they were to the needs of their community and to the rule of law. And that's unfortunate. Here's one thing that you ought to know. Someone that showed tremendous leadership on this issue was Senator Greg Evers. You know, Greg Evers is from an agricultural district, and he voted for E-Verify, supported it strongly, and did everything he could to encourage other colleagues from agricultural districts to join him. Unfortunately, they were too reticent to do so. And so we have to do more. Now, one of the things that Ed and I have worked on is this notion that we shouldn't be providing all of these public services to some of the folks that come here illegally. And we've talked about the fact that every year there's this idea that we ought to extend in-state tuition to the children of illegal aliens. But that makes no sense to us. That would mean that someone who lives just a few miles away across the border in Alabama, in Mobile, would pay 4 times as much for an education in Florida than someone that wasn't here legally. And you'd be subsidizing that activity. And what it does, make no mistake, this creates Florida as a sanctuary state where we would then build in benefits for those folks. I don't know if any of you saw today, Carmen, the only person that emails me as much as gay is Carmen Reynolds. And Carmen, I'll never be lonely now that Carmen has my son. I got news that by a close vote, the First District Court of Appeals in the state of Florida, the first DCA said that if an illegal worker is injured, you, the taxpayers of the state of Florida, are responsible for their workers' compensation. You're responsible for it. And so already, as soon as I got that email from Carmen, I started calling some of my colleagues, and Representative Rich Workman and I are gonna work on legislation to overturn that first DCA decision, because you should not have to pay for all of these extrinsic benefits for people that don't come here legally and don't abide by our laws. Our laws should not provide these protections for folks that are unwilling to adhere to those very laws. And so we'll be working on that, and we'll need your help in that respect. Now, there's a lot more to do. An issue that a lot of us care about is the issue of gun rights. And we should have passed an open carry law in the state of Florida. I fundamentally support open carry. To me, the Second Amendment is absolute. It's just as important as the First Amendment. And when we go in and try to reinterpret the Second Amendment and gun rights, we have well exceeded our authority under the Constitution, and we shouldn't be doing that. One of the pieces of legislation that I sponsored and passed ensured that no local government is able to go and pass an ordinance or a law that infringes upon your gun rights. Now, the reason that occurred is that the city of South Miami passed an ordinance requiring trigger locks. The city of South Miami. And so if you were just a law-abiding citizen traveling in that part of the state and inadvertently crossed a city boundary, you would be a criminal. Despite the fact that you could be someone that has your concealed carry permit that abides by every other law. And to me, it's wrong to create hundreds of different laws that relate to gun rights. The state of Florida ought to have one structure that relates to gun rights, and it shouldn't be this hodgepodge, kaleidoscope approach. So that passed. But we need to work on open carry. The reason open carry didn't pass is that the Florida Sheriff's Association banded together in opposition to that bill. And some of their concerns, I understood, I heard them. They said that if they showed up somewhere that was a tough situation and everyone had a gun on their hip, they wouldn't know where the threat was. They wouldn't be able to neutralize the threat. And so, here was my question to them. In all of the states, in the 38 states that have open carry laws, when has that ever proven to be a problem that's hurt someone? Because guess what? In that very room where everyone is openly carrying, you usually don't have any mix-ups that require the sheriff's office. We're going to keep fighting that battle, and it's one where we need to be reasonable and we need to educate the other side. We need business people to be comfortable that this will actually make our communities more secure, and we need to make sure that folks in law enforcement never feel like we're creating laws that put their lives in danger. Because there's no question that, oh thanks Tony, I appreciate it. There's no question that too many folks in law enforcement in Florida have paid the ultimate price. And we need to respect that, and we need to make sure that, that we give all the dignity to their view that we can, but we of course continue to keep hearkening back to those constitutional principles that seem to have served us pretty well over the last few hundred years.